For 13 days, Benjamin Netanyahu said nothing, not a single public address, not a press conference, not even a brief statement to reassure the Israeli public that their government was in control. 13 days of war, 21 waves of Iranian missile attacks, cluster munitions falling on Tel Aviv, interception rates collapsing, and the Prime Minister of Israel was silent. Then, on day 14, he appeared. The speech lasted 11 minutes. He stood behind a lectern, Israeli flag behind him, and delivered what his office called a message of strength and resolve. He spoke about Israeli resilience. He praised the IDF. He promised victory. And he said absolutely nothing about the one number that matters most. How many Arrow interceptors does Israel have left? Let me tell you why that omission is the entire story. Netanyahu's 13-day silence wasn't about optics. It wasn't about waiting for the right moment to project strength. It was about mathematics. Specifically, the mathematics of defensive attrition that Israeli military planners have been calculating in real time as Iran's missile barrages depleted stockpiles faster than anyone predicted. The silence was the sound of generals telling their prime minister that the numbers don't work anymore. Here's what we know happened during those 13 days. Iran launched 21 separate waves of attacks under Operation True Promise 4. The attacks included ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone swarms. Israeli air defense systems, Iron Dome for short-range threats, David's Sling for medium range, and Arrow for long-range ballistic missiles, fired continuously. Each interception attempt consumed missiles that cost between $1 and $3 million each. And with every successful defense, with every explosion in the sky that the media showed as proof of Israeli invincibility, the stockpile shrank. Arrow interceptors are manufactured by Israel Aerospace Industries in partnership with Boeing. Production capacity is limited. Each missile requires precision components, advanced guidance systems, and extensive quality control. Manufacturing time for a single Arrow interceptor is measured in months. Israel cannot produce these missiles faster than Iran can fire the weapons they're designed to intercept. That's not speculation. That's industrial capacity versus consumption rate. During the 12-day war last June, Israel expended a significant portion of its Arrow stockpile. Defense analysts estimated at the time that Israel used between 40 and 60% of available Arrow missiles. Resupply efforts began immediately, but manufacturing constraints meant full restocking would take years, not months. Now, 7 months later, Israel is fighting another sustained missile campaign, and the consumption rate is higher than June. Let me give you the numbers that explain why Netanyahu stayed silent. According to multiple defense sources, Israel's interception rate against Iranian ballistic missiles has dropped from approximately 90% early in the conflict to somewhere between 65 and 85% by day 7. That drop is not because Iranian missiles suddenly became more sophisticated. It's because Israeli defensive doctrine changed. When you're running low on interceptors, you don't fire 3 missiles at every incoming threat anymore. You fire 1, maybe 2, and if those miss, the incoming missile gets through. This is called triage. It's what happens when a military that built its strategy on overwhelming defensive superiority suddenly realizes the math doesn't support that strategy anymore. You start making choices. Which city gets protected with multiple interceptors? Which incoming missile is deemed less critical? Which population center accepts higher risk because the interceptors need to be saved for the next wave? These are not the calculations a military makes when it's winning. These are the calculations you make when you're losing the attrition battle. Now, here's what Netanyahu said in his 11-minute address. He stated that Israel's air defenses are the most sophisticated in the world. True. He claimed that the vast majority of incoming threats are being intercepted. Technically true, if 65 to 85% counts as vast majority in your calculus. He promised that Israel would continue to defend itself against Iranian aggression. Also true. What he didn't say is how long Israel can continue to defend itself at current consumption rates. If you're asking questions right now about why this matters, hit that subscribe button. Because the mainstream coverage isn't asking these questions. They're showing you explosions in the sky and calling it success. I'm showing you the depletion curve that makes those successes unsustainable. Let me explain what happens when a modern military runs out of interceptors. You don't suddenly lose the ability to defend yourself completely. The systems still work, the radars still track, the launchers are still operational, but you cannot engage every threat. And in a missile defense scenario, partial capability is functionally equivalent to failure, because the missiles that get through kill people. Iran has demonstrated the ability to fire over 200 ballistic missiles in a single day. If Israel's interception rate is 75%, that means 50 missiles get through. 50 ballistic missile impacts on Israeli cities, infrastructure, and military installations. Each impact is a potential mass casualty event. And Israel cannot stop them all because the interceptors are gone. The economic dimension is equally devastating. An Arrow interceptor costs approximately $3 million. Iran's medium-range ballistic missiles, the Kabar Shaken that they've been using extensively, costs somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000 to produce. Iran is trading $500,000 missiles for $3 million interceptors. That's a 6-to-1 cost advantage. Israel's defense budget is substantial, but it's not infinite. The United States provides $3.8 billion in military aid annually. A significant portion of that goes toward Iron Dome and Arrow interceptor procurement. But even with American support, Israel cannot outspend Iran in a sustained missile exchange. The mathematics are brutally simple. Iran can manufacture missiles faster and cheaper than Israel can manufacture the weapons to stop them. During the 13 days of silence, Netanyahu was not just managing a military crisis. He was managing a political one. Because the Israeli public is not stupid. They hear the air raid sirens every night. They see the footage of submunitions falling in residential areas. They know people who've been killed or wounded. And they're asking the same question I'm asking. How long can this continue? Behind closed doors, Israeli Defense Force brass were presenting updated assessments every 6 hours. Each briefing included revised interceptor inventory counts, updated consumption projections, and recalculated sustainability timelines. According to sources familiar with these briefings, the timeline for critical stockpile depletion kept shrinking. Week 3 became Week 2. Week 2 became 10 days. The gap between production and consumption wasn't closing, it was widening. The answer Netanyahu cannot give publicly is the one his military chiefs are giving him privately. Not much longer, not at this pace. Let me tell you what the strategic options look like from inside Israeli command centers right now. Option 1, continue current defensive operations and hope Iranian attacks decrease in intensity before stockpiles run critically low. This is betting on enemy restraint. In military planning, that's called wishful thinking. Option 2, significantly escalate offensive operations against Iran to destroy missile production facilities and launch sites, reducing the number of incoming threats and extending the life of remaining interceptors. This requires deep penetration strikes into Iranian territory, which carries enormous risk of broader regional escalation, and potentially direct confrontation with Russian forces now operating S-400 systems in Iran. Option 3, accept higher civilian casualties by reducing interception attempts, preserving missiles for critical infrastructure defense only. This is politically catastrophic and morally unacceptable, but it's the option that extends defensive capability the longest. Option 4, seek immediate ceasefire regardless of terms. This is strategic surrender. It means Iran achieved its objective. They didn't destroy Israel militarily. They made defending Israel economically and operationally unsustainable. These are the options Netanyahu was evaluating during 13 days of silence. None of them are victories. All of them are variations of managed defeat. If you're still with me, if you're understanding that this isn't about one speech or one politician, it's about the fundamental sustainability of defensive doctrine against mass missile attacks, subscribe to this channel, because we're going to keep tracking the numbers they don't want you to see. Now let me address the elephant in the room. American resupply. Israel's supporters will argue that the United States can and will provide additional interceptors to replenish Israeli stockpiles. This is true. The United States has already committed to accelerating interceptor production. But here's the constraint nobody mentions. The United States is also supplying interceptors to Ukraine. American Patriot missiles are being expended in Ukrainian air defense operations at significant rates. The U.S. defense industrial base is producing interceptors for 2 simultaneous conflicts, and production capacity hasn't increased proportionally. Raytheon, the primary manufacturer of Patriot and Standard missile interceptors, has stated publicly that ramping up production requires time, investment in new facilities, and expansion of specialized component supply chains. We're talking about 18 to 24 months minimum for significant capacity increases. Israel doesn't have 18 months. Israel has weeks, maybe a few months at current attrition rates. Here's the constraint that makes this unsolvable in the short term. Arrow interceptor production relies on components sourced from multiple countries. Guidance systems from the United States, solid rocket motors from Israel, specialized electronics from Europe. This distributed supply chain cannot be accelerated without coordinated expansion across 3 continents. And even if every facility worked triple shifts starting tomorrow, the first additional interceptors wouldn't reach Israeli launchers for 6 to 9 months. The war will be decided long before those missiles arrive. The strategic picture gets worse when you factor in what Iran learned during these 13 days. They learned that saturation attacks work. They learned that Israel cannot sustain 90% interception rates indefinitely. They learned that cluster munitions create disproportionate psychological impact, even when intercepted partially. And most importantly, they learned that time favors the attacker in this equation. But the tactical learning is what should worry Israeli planners even more. Iran refined their launch timing. Early attacks came in waves spaced hours apart, giving Israeli defenses time to reload and reposition. By day 10, the spacing tightened to 30-minute intervals. This forces continuous engagement, preventing reload cycles and maximizing interceptor consumption per hour. Iran also adjusted their mix ratios. They discovered that launching cheap drones 15 minutes before ballistic missiles forces Israel to expend short-range interceptors first, depleting the cheaper systems before the expensive threats arrive. This is doctrine evolution in real time. Every day this conflict continues, Iran's relative position improves. Not because they're winning battles, because Israel is consuming irreplaceable resources, defending against replaceable attacks. This is not a war where superior technology guarantees victory. This is a war where industrial capacity and resource depth determine outcomes. And in that contest, Israel is not winning. Let me show you what Netanyahu's speech revealed through what it didn't say. He didn't provide casualty figures. Official Israeli sources have confirmed at least 8 civilian deaths, and over 3,200 hospitalizations. But Netanyahu didn't mention these numbers. He didn't explain why cluster munitions, banned under international humanitarian law, are falling on Tel Aviv. He didn't address reports that interception rates have dropped by 25 percentage points in 1 week. Instead, he spoke in generalities about Israeli strength and determination. This is the language of political messaging, not strategic reality. When a leader spends 13 days silent during active conflict and then emerges to deliver platitudes rather than details, it tells you one thing. The details are too damaging to share. Here's the detail I want you to focus on. The time gap. 13 days is an eternity in modern warfare. During World War II, entire campaigns were decided in 13 days. In the age of 24-hour news cycles and instant communication, a wartime leader going silent for nearly 2 weeks is extraordinary. It means the situation was too fluid, too uncertain, or too bad to comment on. I believe it was all three. Israeli air defense systems were being tested beyond their design parameters. Stockpile calculations were being revised daily as consumption rates exceeded projections. And military planners were delivering assessments that no politician wants to hear. We can't sustain this. The footage from Netanyahu's speech shows something else that matters. He looked tired, not just physically exhausted, though he clearly was. Tired in the way people look when they know the options available are all bad, and they have to choose the least catastrophic one. That's not the expression of a leader confident in victory. That's the face of someone managing decline. Now, Iran responded to Netanyahu's speech within hours. Their statement was brief and pointed. They said Netanyahu can make speeches, but speeches don't stop missiles. They're right. And that's the entire problem. Israel has built the most sophisticated air defense network in the world. They've spent billions developing and deploying systems that can intercept threats across multiple layers of engagement envelope. And it's not enough. Not against an adversary willing to fire hundreds of missiles over sustained periods. This is the strategic lesson that every military on Earth is learning right now. Offense is cheaper than defense in the missile age, always. An interceptor will always cost more than the missile it's designed to stop. A defensive network will always be more expensive to operate than an offensive missile force. And in extended conflicts, the attacker's cost advantage compounds over time. China is watching this and recalculating Taiwan scenarios. If Israel, with American support and cutting-edge technology, cannot sustain defensive operations against Iranian missile barrages, how would Taiwan fare against Chinese missile attacks? The parallels are obvious. Russia is watching and applying lessons to Ukraine. North Korea is watching and updating its doctrine for potential conflict with South Korea. Netanyahu's silence wasn't just about Israeli domestic politics. It was a global demonstration of a new strategic reality. Missile defense works, but not well enough, not cheaply enough, and not sustainably enough to negate the offensive missile threat. Let me close with this. Netanyahu is alive. He finally spoke. And his speech told us more through what it omitted than what it included. Israel's interceptor stockpiles are depleting faster than they can be replaced. Interception rates are dropping. Casualties are mounting. And the mathematics of attrition favor Iran. None of this means Israel will lose this war militarily. But it does mean Israel cannot win it defensively. The next phase of this conflict will be determined by whether Israel escalates offensively to destroy Iranian missile capabilities at the source, or accepts a new reality where perfect defense is impossible and some missiles will always get through. Both choices have catastrophic implications. And Netanyahu's 13 days of silence were spent calculating which catastrophe is less existential. Share this video, because the story being told on mainstream media is about one politician's speech. The story I just told you is about the failure of defensive doctrine against mass missile attacks. Both are true. Only one explains what happens next. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing the numbers behind the headlines, because this war is being fought in procurement rates and stockpile calculations as much as it's being fought in the skies over Tel Aviv. And those numbers don't lie. Israel is running out of time, running out of missiles, and running out of options. Netanyahu's silence just told us he knows it.